Bedtime breathers. Bedtime breathers. Don't be afraid. These are for your enjoyment. Just a quick warning, don't be afraid if you see information about death. Hello everybody, it's Bruce Grant again from Bedtime Breathers. I've been missing for quite a few days, in fact, simply because I had to visit the dentist to have an ultra-sensitive tooth dealt with, as well as a loose tooth which had roots like tree trunks. And he extracted the tooth and kindly gave me COVID, which I suffered from for about 8 to 10 days, along with additional pain from the extraction itself. That was most unfortunate. After that, then I had another bug that really laid me down. So I'm feeling a bit secondhand. Anyway, to bring this next story to you is called Shadow. And here we go. I hope you like it. Dictionary. Shadow. Noun. A dark area or shape produced by a body coming between rays of light and a surface. Example, trees cast long shadows. A mass noun, the shaded part of a picture. A dark patch or area on a surface. Her face was pale, and there were shadows under her eyes. A region of opacity on a radiograph. Shadows on his lungs. 2. Used in reference to proximity, ominous oppressiveness, or sadness and gloom. The shadow of war fell across Europe. Only one shadow lay over Sally's life. Almost blinded by the brilliant sunshine, he dropped his gaze to fall upon his shadow, which faithfully followed his every move and never left his own body, as it was permanently attached to him at his feet. Of course, the shadow had extremely sharp edges, as well defined by the brilliant light prevented from covering the ground where his shadow existed. Once that brilliant light source no longer existed, his shadow usually faded away to almost nothing. Occasionally, if it was without any bright source of light, but still with a brighter-than-grey day, there appeared on the ground a sort of slightly darker smudge relating to his own body's imaging, which emitted less light than the surrounding environment. On another level, if he moved into an area of artificial light, then his shadow revived itself once more, showing itself to be completely attached at his feet and describing various lengths of his body's antics depending upon the altitude of the artificial light. The lower the physical altitude of the light source relative to his own height, the longer his shadow grew. In spite of his age and the number of years he had lived in that geographical setting, offering extensive sunlight hours during the daytime, and his abode, which was situated well inside the central area of the city, he never ceased to be amazed by the loyalty of his shadow to that of his body's antics. Moreover, the shadow never ever complained about being tired, nor lacking in energy, neither having to follow his body's direction, wherever that might be. It was very simple to see that the shadow had no voice at all. But still, he marvelled at the fact that he'd never heard his shadow voice anything in any way, shape, or form. A truly remarkable companion when the environment allowed it to be. His name was Shadrach. Shadrach had been educated at one of the traditional schools of the country in which his parents lived since their own births, and had been adamant that he go to the best of the educational centres. It seemed that, as his parents had ample supplies of income for their family uses, Shadrach never really went short of anything in his life. He just assumed that whatever happened to him, because of him or because all the other influences in his life, including his teachers as well as his peers, were the natural order of things and did not cause him any particular wonder. His shadow, on the other hand, had always intrigued him. He often thought about his shadow and wondered many times whether or not his shadow was an independent force, or whether it was permanently slaved to his person and completely unable to operate in its own environment according to its own will, if it had one, whether without being triggered by his own body. This musing was not a once-upon-a-time occurrence, but something that he thought about very frequently, almost every time he went out of his home. The one thing that he never seemed to be able to do was to gain insight as to exactly what and why his shadow was. His musings always started at the same place, and by the time he reached his destination, he never really seemed to have gained any insight or knowledge whatsoever. Shadrach went to his local library to try and find information that would allow him to better understand his shadow. Upon entering the edifice, he found the senior librarian, and, walking towards her station, he raised his finger to attract her attention, in which he succeeded, and proceeded to ask her where he might find any information dealing with his question. She advised him to climb 2 levels and go to shelving C26 and look there for 3 or 4 books that deal with the physics, light, and shadows. He thanked her in a sort of nonchalant manner and made his way to the described shelving unit, which was on the 3rd floor of the library. Now, he thought, he would be able to better understand what his shadow was exactly, and why it behaved the way in which it did. His enthusiasm grew as he perused the various tomes, properly balanced and packed in their correct positions upon the shelf. He did not realize just how much information did exist with respect to shadows and light. Upon seeing these books, he began to realize that this was perhaps the first time in his life that he had any real urge to find the answers to the questions that were plaguing him every time he went out from his home. His hunt for those answers brought about a determination that he had never experienced earlier in his life, and he decided that he would not rest until he unearthed the information he was mining for.
Sorry about the noise you could hear. It was our spin dryer doing its function.
Fortunately, there was a table with some chairs practically adjacent to the shelving unit, allowing Shadrach to take an empty seat and place his books on the tabletop, while opening one of them and scanning through the contents to see if there was a specific page number indicated to, or dedicated rather, to the place where the information he wished to learn might be hidden. Alas, this was not the case. Losing a little of his enthusiasm, he closed the book, discarding it away from the pile he'd created. Grabbing hold of a second book, which was about 2 times heavier, and opened it to search the contents in that book, he found the section dedicated to light and shadows once more, increasing his determination to acquire his intelligence. That second book that he'd pored over relinquished its information quite slowly, because the manner in which it had been recorded was far more intricate than Shadrach's ability to understand it. He spent hours reading and rereading the information in rather futile attempts of succeeding in lodging it as a permanent fixture in his brain. Nonetheless, he persevered, and by early evening he'd recorded sufficient information in his noggin to moderately correctly understand what a shadow was and how it was most likely to be formed. Gradually, by spending more time in the library than he'd originally anticipated, he evaluated the information contained in the other large books as well. Fortunately, it should improve his understandings quite considerably, enabling him to retain yet more information and more accurately to boot. The librarian, upon his third or fourth visit, commented on the fact that he was becoming a regular visitor, and she hoped that he was benefiting to the extent that the number of visits alluded to. He smiled slightly to the librarian and once again ascended to the heavens to further scrutinize the disquisition of his attention of all of his previous visits. He was, albeit a little slowly, increasing his understanding to the point where he could converse quite intelligently with anyone regarding the subject of light and shadows. Through chatter and idle gossip committed not only by the librarian, but some other visitors to that centre of condensed information, as they sat and all met in cafes away from the library to discuss this unusual individual whose name they did not actually know, who seemed to be absolutely engrossed in the subject of light and shadows. How they happened to know about the subject was simply because of the pile of books on the table, quite blatantly advertising that particular subject, with Shadrach resting his head between his two hands while absorbing information as quickly as he was able. It was about 2 months later when the town in which he lived needed some rather special advice with respect to lighting and shadows in the illumination of the city. The gossip that had been bandied around for previous few months had revealed that a number of people were looking to that unusual individual, whose name was still not known publicly, to offer some advice to the city, as he might well be the most informed person in the entire region, who could possibly best advise them on lighting and shadows. The city mayor called together his staff for a meeting where he put out the question of the possibility of receiving advice from this individual, and would any one of the staff happen to know who he was. One of the older members of the staff happened also to be a member of the library and personally knew the librarian. Consequently, he suggested that he would ask the librarian to discover the name of that particular visitor, and would be possible for any of the government members to be able to meet with this individual and secure his assistance and advice with respect to lighting and shadows for the city in the coming winter. There was even a suggestion from the mayor's staff, that of offering a fee for his advice. The very fact that this subject became more pressing by the day elicited a tentative agreement from the mayor as to payment of a fee to Shadrach. Once informed about the intention of the mayor's office with respect to advice, the librarian took it upon herself to properly introduce her person and her affiliation with a member of the mayor's staff, and put forth the question to her visitor. Within 18 minutes of her receiving this information, Shadrach walked into the library to resume his research. As was his wont, he started walking past the librarian's desk. But before succeeding fully, she caught his arm and asked if she would be allowed to pose her question. Shadrach was a little surprised, but happily agreed to her delaying tactic. Very carefully, she outlined the fact that the city government had become aware of his studious nature with respect to light and shadows. As a result, the mayor had asked if any one of his staff happened to know of any person capable of advising them with respect to lighting and shadows for the city's winter experiences. She further explained that As he had been a very regular visitor and one who was deeply involved with the studying of this particular subject, his personage had come to the forefront of possibilities as a competent advisor. In light of this, she asked if he would object to giving her his name, which, after a moment's hesitation, he offered freely and with a smile. Quite relieved that she asked if he would allow her to pass his name to the city government, and also suggested that there might be a fee for his advice, but please check before believing it to be true. The end of part 1. Part 2, I'll do again in just a few days, hopefully before the end of March. So I'll see you on the next video.